Welcome to the FEG Insight Bridge. This is Greg Dowling, Head of Research and CIO at FEG. This show spans global markets and institutional investments through conversations with some of the world's leading investment, economic, and philanthropic minds to provide insight on how institutional investors can survive and even thrive in the world of markets and finance. Do you believe in miracles? Today on the FEG Insight Bridge, we will have Jack O'Callahan, member of the 1980 Miracle on Ice team. He is in town to help support the FEG Hockey Classic, and we dragged him into our podcast studio. He is going to share his hockey journey from a boy growing up in Boston to being part of one of sport's greatest upsets. We will hear how a group of individuals formed a team that beat the intimidating and seemingly invincible Red Army team. Jack will also share some memories of coaching legend Herb Brooks. We'll talk about his involvement in the movie The Miracle. We'll talk about his transition from the Olympics to the NHL. And finally, running an investment business. And of course, we'll get a bunch of great stories and some lessons learned along the way. Jack, welcome to the FEG Insight Bridge.
Well, thanks, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here in Cincinnati, and I'm pretty excited. Looking forward to the next couple of days with everyone here, and it's going to be a great event supporting the Icebreakers and the sled hockey program here in Cincinnati.
We appreciate you supporting them and making the trip up. And we're going to talk a lot of hockey, and we're going to talk a lot about probably the game, the Miracle on Ice. But before we get there, can we talk a little bit about just like what was your experience kind of leading up to the Miracle? What was hockey like for you?
So if you're talking about in the weeks before the Olympics, or you're talking about when I started playing hockey in Boston as a 9-year-old?
Just from 9 to 19 and in 2 minutes.
Well, I grew up in a little town in Boston, in the city, Charlestown, and it's a half a mile from Boston Garden, so we're giant Bruins fans and love sports. 1 square mile, they call it the Irish Square Mile. I've been to Ireland a few times. When I go there, I think I'm running into all my neighbors, and they're actually native Irishmen. But we all love sports, played a lot of street hockey. I did not skate. I was a little embarrassed because my friends, some of them were playing organized peewee hockey, and I just was not a good skater, but I got really good at ball hockey. And eventually Bobby Orr came to town, and everybody wanted to be Bobby Orr, and I was just included. But I think part of it with me was I was a little bit of a late starter in my neighborhood. Gave me a little motivation to catch up. And my parents were always very supportive, and my dad was very supportive. And I would break my skates. I was over my ankles so much. We kept having to go back to Leechmere and trade them in. I just got on the ice, and there was a priest in town in St. Catharines where I was an altar boy. The way he connected with the neighborhood was through hockey. He rented the ice in an MDC rink, which was a state-owned rink. He would be out there with dad and, every Sunday night, and eventually I got to go and play with the kids that were learning how to skate. I got better at it. I was always very competitive, still am, and I think that's what helped drive me through as a youth hockey player in Charlestown, growing up through peewees and bantams and midgets, and then in high school I played at Boston Latin School, City League, against South Boston, Charlestown, and all these city schools, all public schools. Yeah, and all of a sudden, I was going to school to be an academic person, to go to an Ivy League school and be a lawyer or get into business or something like that. And next thing you know, I started getting recruited, and before you know it, I'm playing hockey to BU, and we're winning everything, and I'm like the man, and I'm getting all these awards and all this recognition, and I get drafted, and next thing you know, I'm playing on the Olympic team and the NHL, and all of a sudden, I'm 32 years old. So it's just in a quick 2 minutes, I think that's kind of how it all happened for me.
Thank you for clarifying. We would have never known you were from Boston.
Yeah, I know. I haven't lived there since I was 25, but everybody says to me, I get 5 words on them. You're from Boston. I was like, I don't know, man. I don't understand it. I'll tell you a quick funny story. I'd be transitioning from living in Chicago and going back to Boston in the summers, and I was trying to figure out how to communicate with people because I am right from the city, and I had a tremendous Boston accent. And my friends in Boston would give me a hard time because I was talking like I'm from Chicago. And my Chicago buddies were saying, what did you say? So I was getting very frustrated. So I was out one night after a golf thing in Chicago, and a bunch of hockey guys and Blackhawk guys. And I said something, and everybody started laughing. And I was getting a little aggravated. And so I said, you guys are crazy. I don't have a Boston accent anymore. My friends in Boston would give me trouble about it. I'm talking from Chicago back and forth. I was getting frustrated. They said, you don't have a Boston accent? How? They all start laughing. Now I'm getting more frustrated. And so Dale Talon said to me, you don't think you have a Boston accent anymore? I said, no. He said, great, say this word, Lantern. And I said, Lantern. And they all started laughing.
That is great.
Not lantern.
Yeah, you can't take the Boston out.
No, you can't. It's still here at this point in my life.
So you're at BU, great hockey program, right? And you had a lot of success there. How do you get an invite to the tryouts?
I graduated in 1979. We all knew there was an Olympics in 1980. It was going to be in Lake Placid. And that was sort of my goal, was to, even when I was a freshman, I was thinking like, look, if I do well here and things go well, maybe I could have a chance to try out for that team. Just thinking about it. Because even though I had been drafted by the Blackhawks at the end of my sophomore year, I never thought I was going to play in the National Hockey League. Americans just didn't play in the league. And I didn't want to be a minor league guy riding buses and so I just was focused on maybe playing in the Olympics, trying out a college career that got me into that situation, and then being done, then just, like I said, going into a graduate school program and moving on in my life. The way it kind of turns out is that, Herb Brooks was the coach, and it was a 2-year process, right? So, I mean, it's a long story. There's something called the World Cup, and it's basically in May or so, mid-April to mid-May every year, and it's in Europe. Back in those days, it was the European Stanley Cup, right? Because there were no Europeans in the National Hockey League. So that was their big thing. Like the Russians, the Swedes, the Finns, the Czechs, all of them they focused on the World Cup. Now the Canadians, and for the most part the Americans, some of them were playing professionally, most of them in the minors, they would send players over there from teams that did not make the playoffs. And then they would always sprinkle in a couple of college kids. Now, I played in 78. We won the national championships at BU, and I was the captain of the team, and I had a great year. So I went to Prague and played most of the preseason part. And then I was like, I'm not staying here for the whole thing because you're not paying me, because I was an amateur and, I got to get back to school. I don't want to be gone for a month. So I left that one. And then the next year, when I was a senior, we were the number one team in the country, but we finished with a thud in our last few games. We didn't make the Final Four, and I was a little frustrated. But that year, in the spring of 79, so Herb Brooks was the coach of that team, someone who I didn't have any run-ins with him, but I had some run-ins with his team when I was a freshman. And so I had this like open wound, I really didn't like the guy. But Herbie was coaching that team, so he took a lot of college guys. Normally they would take, say, 75% pros and 25% college kids. This year it was almost inverted. And he took a lot of college kids. Most of the guys ended up on the Olympic team. So that was my first experience with Herb, going to Moscow, which was really cool because I'm a history guy, and I really enjoyed being in Moscow for a month in 1979, pre-Cold War, behind the Iron Curtain and all that. So it was pretty neat. I mean, Brezhnev came to all the Russian games. It was pretty awesome to be around there and just experience the whole Russian culture. And I thought I played okay, but not great. I was thinking, I don't know, he's probably not going to pick me anyway because he hates Boston guys. But, when I came back, I had an agent at the time because I was getting out of college. And my agent was actually my defense coach at BU. He got his law degree while I was getting my undergrad degree. Bob Murray was still close friends to this day. And I remember talking to Bobby, and he said, yeah, Herbie was really impressed with you and this, that, and the other thing. And so, yeah, I ended up, having a spot on the team. I was going to be on the team. I knew that, but I could also lose it if I didn't go out there and work my butt off, once the training camp and our 55-game schedule started.
We'll talk a little bit about this East-West divide, right? We'll talk about the miracle later, but the movie really kind of makes a big deal of it. I think in one of the early scenes, you just take out one of the Minnesota players.
I got to know the director pretty well, Gavin O'Connor. He was an Irish guy from New York, Staten Island. He grew up, surrounded by cops and firemen and electricians and plumbers like I did in Boston. We had a lot in common. He had played football at UPenn, and my character was in the script, so I got to go to some of the early planning and this and that, and I was involved in the negotiations of the deal that we made with Disney. I kind of was around it right on, the early part, and he had to try to show that there was the animosity. Now, the animosity between the BU guys and the Eastern guys and the West and the Minnesota guys really went back to our freshman year in 1976, the Final Four out in Denver, when we were the number one team in the country, and they kind of went after our best player, and the benches cleared. I mean, the benches don't clear at college hockey games, but in 1976 in Denver, the benches cleared with BU in Minnesota, and there's a picture of me. This guy, Tommy Youngins, who I got to know in one of those World Cups, eventually, he was a little older than me, but I mean, there's a picture of me, and I got him by the throat, and I ripped his helmet off, and I was cracking him over the head with it. And so it was really ugly, very ugly. And they ended up winning the game and winning the Nationals. And so I took that away as a freshman. I just hated those guys, and we never really played them because we played out East and they played out West. And the only time we had a chance to get back at them was in the summer of 78. Out in Colorado Springs, and this is a U.S. National Sports Festival. So the New England team played the Minnesota team, and it just devolved into just a massive brawl. And that's what happened. And so, you got a 2-hour movie, and Gavin was telling me, I got to show it somehow. And, McClanahan's in the movie a lot. His character's in the script, your character's in the script. So he had me fighting Robbie, and Robbie and I are really good friends. And Robbie's not that guy. He's just a great hockey player, but he wasn't like me. I was like a penalty minute guy and a physical guy, and So in the movie, he showed my character fighting Robbie, and my character threw a punch at Robbie and cut his lip. So at the time, Robbie was living in Chicago, and we were both getting divorced together. So we were kind of living together while our wives threw us out of the house. It was pretty funny. And when it came out, and people would ask Robbie, he's like, "Did you really fight Jack?" And he's like, "I would never fight that guy. You know where he's from? He's from the town." I was like, "That's okay, though." But it was funny because he's also in the investment business. He just retired, but we had a lot of mutual friends in the business, and they would give him a hard time about how his character got the crap kicked out of him by me, but it never really happened.
Gotcha. That's great.
Yeah.
It does talk a little bit about how you have this great team of individuals, but not necessarily a great team, right? It's not cohesive yet. How did Herb Brooks kind of get that over that schedule?
It's a great question. Let's kind of go back to that Moscow thing, right? So we played over there in the spring of '79. Again, I thought I played okay, but not great. I wasn't sure if Herbie was going to take me. I didn't really trust him anyway, but he was pretty fair with me over there. But I just didn't think I thought I could have played much better. It's a big rink, and I wasn't this pure skater. I was a good skater, but I wasn't a pure skater, and I had all the self-doubt, and so when I came back, I met with Bob Murray, my agent, and he said, "I want to talk to you." I had a conversation with Herbie, and that's when he told me that, "Hey, Herbie, he's going to guarantee you a spot in the team." It was me and like 5 or 6 other guys that he guaranteed spots to, and I was like, "Wow, that's pretty." It surprised me, and I said, "Well, what did he say? Did he like the way I passed the puck, how I skated, how I make plays? What do you think? I'm tough?" He goes, "We never really talked about that. He just talked about you as a person. He likes your competitiveness, your team first attitude. He says, he liked your attitude. He likes the way you never quit. You're always encouraging people, and you're a real leader, natural leader." And so I was saying, well, what about my abilities as a hockey player? He's like, he doesn't care about that. So Herbie really made sure that he got to know the people on the team. Now, he knew the Minnesota guys because he had recruited them all and had coached them for the past many years. So that was easy. He ended up with 12 Minnesota guys on that Olympic team. For him to reach out to Boston and to grab 4 of us from Boston University, he had to take time to understand who we were as people, to make sure that we would put team first. Gave us all psychological tests so he could understand that, how to motivate guys. I'm not the kind of guy you could just yell and scream at. That doesn't motivate me. That just aggravates me. And so I'm going to drop the gloves with the coach if that's the way he's going to treat me. So Herbie never really yelled at me. He would talk to me. He would engage me, and he involved me in the leadership sort of component of the team. And he would talk to me. And he had this thing where if he even told me he wanted me to be one of his whipping boys. If I yell O'Callahan this, O'Callahan that during practice, that's me talking to the team through you, and I need you to work a lot harder. And he says, but if I say, "Hey, Jack, you better get your butt moving," he goes, "That's me talking to you." So anyway, it happened several times during the year. By doing that, it gave me some sense of ownership of the team. And he knew I needed that because he got to know me, what drives me. And he did that with every guy on that team. And he also knew that he wanted guys that were team first guys because he knew he had to have a cohesive team. One of the things I say when I talk to people, and even when, whether it's young groups or teams or whatever, is players don't win championships, teams win championships, right? So, even when you're talking to an individual player, a figure skater or someone like that, you'll hear them talk about it too. As much as they're out there alone doing what they're doing by themselves, they have a team behind them. And yes, they have to go out and perform. We all have to go out and perform. But you do need the support. You need the team behind you, and you need the support, and you need everybody around you working together. And that's how you create success.
So Coach Brooks had a reputation as being very tough. And there's a story where you guys are in the lead up to the Olympics. You're playing a bunch of exhibition games. You're in Norway. You tie Norway. And he wasn't happy with it. What happened?
No, he wasn't happy with it. So the way our season started, we went to the National Sports Festival. So that was, say, in the early part of July of '79. And then he picked the team after us being out there for 2 weeks. So we had 26 guys. He said, "Go home for 2 weeks, get your lives together. You'll be back in Lake Placid in August, first part of August." And then he put us through this 2-week intense training camp. And, Lake Placid's in the mountains. So we're sprinting up and down this hill, and then we're on the ice, and he's beating us like dogs. And after 2 weeks, we got on a plane. We went to Europe. We played 10 games over there. We ended up playing 55 games, between early August and, say, early February of 1980. But in those 10 games, we did really well over there. I think we were in Finland, we were in Norway, we played different teams. We went to the northern part of Oulu, Finland, which is up by the Arctic Circle. It was just a great experience. But our last 2 games were against Norway. We get towards the end of a 2.5, 3 week grind, and we're just kind of worn out. We're lugging our bags all around, Scandinavia. You know, we had 3 goalies and sort of 4 sets of defensemen. So we had, we had 8 defensemen. We had 3 extra forwards. So every night, 6 guys sat out, right? 1 goalie, 2 D, and 3 forwards. And it wasn't like if you played well one night, you didn't sit out. It wasn't like that. We knew that games you weren't going to be playing, right? Because it was early in the year. And so that first game against Norway, I was not in the lineup. And so anyhow, I'm up in the stands. We tied them 3-3, and the place was all excited because, Norway obviously wasn't in our class as a team, but we just kind of laid an egg. And so 6 of us came down after the game, and we're in, suits or whatever we're wearing, street clothes. And Craig Patrick's there, and he's telling the guys, yeah, you got to stay on the ice. And so I'm there in my street clothes, and I go, hey, Craig, what's up? And he says, he's not happy, man. He wants him to stay on the ice. He's going to skate him. And the first thing I said to him was like, okay, we'll go put our equipment on. Because, again, we're a team, right? That's sort of who I am, right, as far as my leadership and as far as my team first program. And I was like, okay, we're going to go put our stuff on. If our team's skating, we're skating with them, right? So he said, Jack, don't bother. Just go stand on the bench. If he wants you to he'll tell you. Just stay away from him, but just, so he knows you're there and he'll tell you. So I'm like, I went over and stood on the bench next to him. So I saw the whole thing. And it was unbelievable, man. He's got these guys on the line, and we used to do that. He had his favorite drill was, he'd line the team up on the goal line, and he'd have to skate, goal line to first blue line, sprint, stop, back, red line, back, blue line, far blue line, back, all the way down and back. You had to do it inside of 45 seconds. It's a challenge.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The Minnesota kids called them Herbies.
Herbies.
Yeah. So he had these guys doing Herbies for like 40 minutes. And I'm on the bench watching it, and and this guy came over, and the rink manager. First of all, people were sticking in the stands, and they were watching us. They thought we were putting on an exhibition or something like that. And then they realized that we were just getting, we just skated like into the ground. And so then they all left. And so then the rink manager came over, and I heard him talk to the doctor. This guy, George Nagabad's amazing doctor. He was one of Herbie's advisors in a way, but he was a doctor, team doctor. He could speak like 7 languages. And so this guy came over, started talking to him in Norwegian, and, Doc can communicate with him. And he comes to Herbie, he goes, hey, the guy wants to go home. His wife's at home, his kids, he's got a guy. And Herbie didn't even look at Doc. And I was standing right next to him. He just said, tell him to leave me the keys. I'll lock up. So this guy stormed away and turned the lights out. And so all the guys thought they were done. And he starts screaming at them, we're not done. Get on that line. I'm like, wow. So now they're skating in the dark, but now Herbie can't really see them. So now all of a sudden guys, they get courage, right?
They're coasting a little bit.
No, they get courage. They start yelling at him like, banging their sticks. And he's screaming at them, you pay 1 more stick back. So I'm just like laughing, going, I'm so glad I'm not out there. So anyhow, I told the director all about it in the movie, and it wasn't even in the original script. It ended up in the movie because, I told him what happened. It became one of the greatest scenes in the movie,
Absolutely.
Yeah. And these youth hockey players, they would watch the movie, and coaches would tell me, he's like, Jack, I got 8-year-olds begging us that we could turn the lights out and make them skate, and do Herbies like they're 8 years old, but they want to do what you guys did in the movie. And I was like, oh my God, that is not a great legacy.
I've done Herbies before. It's
45 seconds, man. That was hard.
Your legs
Especially
burn.
doing 30 of them.
Any other great Brooks stories like that?
Well, here's the other thing. The night after that game, I'm in my room, and I get a knock on the door, and it's Craig Patrick. It's at 10 o'clock at night. He goes, Jack, Herbie wants to see us. So I think immediately I'm in trouble. I'm like, what did I do wrong? I didn't even play. And that was the night he took me down to his room, and he said how he was, he has whipping boys, and he explained the whole thing to me, how it was going to be O'Callahan or Jack, and this. I'm like, you can't tell anybody. I was like, all right. So, I didn't tell anybody, but the year went on. But it was funny, the next day, Herbie had all these sayings, like things, I don't know. Like one of his favorite lines was, you're playing, worse and worse every day, and today you're playing like us next week. And so I remember after that Norway game, the second day when we played them, because we played them and tied them 3-3. The next day we played them and we beat them 9-1. So we were sitting in the locker going, oh my God, now he thinks that if he skates us in the dark, that's going to be good for us. So we just might have screwed ourselves. But anyhow, one of the guys, Sean Harrington, was like, hey, did you hear what he said? He said something like, I don't know, like, you look like an octopus setting up a lounge chair or something. He's like, So he wrote it down on a piece of tape, and he rolled it in a ball. And he would carry, and as the season went on, every time Herbie would come in and say something like, one of Herbie's little lines, we'd be looking around the locker room. We'd wait till he walked out, and we'd like, put that down, put it down. He'd write it. And by the end of the year, the ball was as big as a soccer ball, right? It was a ball of tape, and he would always carry it around in his bag, and he'd always had it in the locker room. So it kind of did become a little bit like us against him, but we kept we kept it light and loose and funny. Listen, we listened to the guy because he controlled our fate. it helped us grow together as a team, because we had this thing of a little bit us against them. And I think that's how Herbie wanted it. Craig Patrick became the conduit more. We could talk to Craig. We could go to his house after practice and have a few beers with him. I mean, he actually let me use his car all year because we were living in apartments out in Burnsville, Minnesota. But the interesting thing is in the year 2000, we had a 20-year reunion down at this golf club where I belonged down in South Carolina. So all the guys came down. We had a bunch, some other people came down. The whole team wasn't there. We had about 16 guys, maybe 18 out of 26. Plus, I invited Herbie and some other guys, too. But so one night we're out on the porch. We're all sitting around, having a few pops, smoking some cigars, just telling stories. And there's other members around. It was a really great night. And so I actually said, how about that O'Callahan Jack thing, whipping boy stuff? He told me never to tell anybody. So it took me 20 years to tell people on my team that it was going on. And when I told them, 3 or 4 other guys go, he was doing that to you, too? So you think about it, when he set me up for that program of his, and he told me you can't tell anybody, I didn't tell anybody, and he was doing it with 4 or 5 other guys, and they didn't tell anybody. It took us 20 years to actually share that with each other. So that's how much we respected him and cared for him, and cared for his methodology. We just would not violate his confidence.
Oh, that's great. All right, so let's talk about the Red Army team. Try to explain it to folks who maybe they know the story, but they're not hockey fans. How good was this team?
Well, the first time we saw them was in the Canadian game in 72 when they had the Challenge Cup or whatever. They played 8 games, I think. And they played like 4 in Moscow and they played 4 across Canada. The guy that gave me the Lantern story, Dale Talon, he was actually on that team. Bobby Orr was on that team, and they had great players on that team, like the greatest players, Bobby Clark, Phil Esposito, on and on. The Russians, who we had never heard of, like we were thinking, oh, the Russians, who are they? They're going to get killed. These are the best NHL players in the world. And they came over, won the first 3 games or something, like in Canada, and it was unbelievable. It really was a shock to the system, his system of hockey in North America, that these Russians could come over and play the kind of game they played, this puck possession game, and they were so strong and fast and could move the puck, and they were so skilled, and it was amazing. Now, they ended up winning the series, I think. They won some games in Moscow. It really devolved into the North American players just started getting really physical because the Russians didn't fight. And the North Americans, they knew the Russians, don't get me wrong, they were kind of dirty in places, but they didn't fight. The refs and everything else favored the Canadians, the NHL guys. But I mean, it was a real wake-up call to see the Russians play the best team players in the world and basically manhandle them. And this guy Trachak in goal was insanely great. So that was our first experience as a North American hockey player, which is 1972. And then, they won the 72 Olympics, right, which was in Sapporo, Japan. They won 76 in Innsbruck. They're going to win 1980 as well. And, we saw them. We didn't play them when we were in Moscow for the World Cup in 79. But believe me, we saw them. They barely gave up a goal in 7 or 8 games that they played in that tournament. And Brezhnev was at every game. And there were Russian soldiers around the rink with AK-47s in full gear. It was all part of the experience, the Russian experience, but they were great. They were the premier, global sort of exposition of communism and Russian way of life, right? It's like, we have the best way of life. Look how great our hockey team is, right? So it really was. I mean, as much as they had great gymnasts and all that, Russians love hockey, right? Love it. It's probably their national sport. They were just great, right? Great. We played 55 games, obviously. We played all through the minor leagues, AAA baseball, basically, like the American Hockey League, Central League. So the one step down from the NHL. We played 5 NHL teams. We played some college teams over the course of this, from August all the way through February. And our last game was in Madison Square Garden against the real Russian team, like the real Russians, like Mikhailov and Trachak and Karlamov and all those guys, right? The real Russians, the Red Army team. And they just destroyed us. I mean, they beat us.
And you got hurt.
And I hurt my knee. Yeah. So that's a whole other story. We could talk about this for hours. Anyhow, they just beat us up. I mean, I think it was Al Michael said, yeah, they beat him 10-3. And I hate to say this, but it wasn't that close. And it wasn't. I mean, it really wasn't. And they beat us up and they banged us up and they banged me up really good. That was our first experience with them. So then we had to lick our wounds a little bit, and we were already checked into Lake Placid at that point. We had checked into Lake Placid, say, on a Thursday, and then Saturday we go down to play the Russians. And then the rosters have to be finalized Monday at 5 or 6 o'clock p.m. And our first game is against Sweden on Tuesday, right? So they had beaten us up on Saturday, like demoralized us, you would think, but the Olympics start in 3 days, so we got to get our stuff together, right? So it was very interesting. We just took it, We were like, oh, well, now we know what can happen if we, try to play their game, right? So we just kind of took it, and we kept our stuff together. Herbie kept me on the team. I somehow worked really hard on my rehab over the course of 2 or 3 days. I missed the first 2 games. I didn't play as much as I had normally played. I mean, I was leading scoring defenseman on the team. I was most penalty minutes, and, I played all the time. And all of a sudden, I had a lesser role, but it allowed Davey Christian to step into a bigger role as a defenseman, not a forward. So in a way, it worked out great because, Davey played great. Then we go into the Olympics. We tie Sweden, we beat the Czechs, and then we win the next 3 games.
Hold on for a second.
Okay, I won't jump ahead.
The Swedes are pretty good, right?
Swedes are great.
And you were down.
Well, we were down. Played 7 Olympics games. We started every game down 1-0.
That one you came back right at the end.
43 seconds, yeah. We pulled the goalie, and Billy Baker scored late in the game and tied it 2-2, and it really energized us. I mean, they had guys like Pelle Lindbergh was their goalie. They had guys that ended up in the NHL. I mean, many guys on that team. And then we played the Czechs. I mean, the Stasnys are on that. They had great players. And
the Czechs were probably the second best.
They were the second best team in the world. The problem with that year is that the Czechs, I mean, Pelle Lindbergh, Swedish goalie, Trejček, Russian goalie. The Czechs did not have a good goalie. I mean, it was maybe 6 years before Dominik Hasek showed up. He wasn't there in that series. So the goalie was weak, and we filled the net on them. I think we beat them 7-2, which was crazy to beat the Czechs like that because they were the second best team in the world, without a doubt. And then we end up, we cruise through and we win the rest. Now we're playing the Russians.
You have this great run.
Yeah, over 2 weeks, every other night. So that was the thing. Like, the country just got really excited about it because we played Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Monday, Wednesday. It was awesome.
The problem with the Olympics oftentimes is that they're in foreign countries. Time is weird. This was in the U.S.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Everybody's watching it.
Yeah.
But you have this great run, and your reward is playing the Russians.
Well, that's okay. I mean, we knew it was, believe me, we were hoping we'd have a chance to play them because that meant that we were in the medal round. You're going to have to beat them eventually.
Eventually, yeah.
Yeah. We don't really care about them. We were playing our own schedule that was predetermined, it was preset 2 years ago, prior to the Olympics. They were not in our pool. So Russians were in the pool with Finland and Canada. We were in the pool with the Czechs and the Swedes. And so we had to basically finish top 2. So it was us and Sweden. And over there, Canada was really good. I mean, they had really good team. They lost to the Finns. Because they lost to the Finns, Finland and Russia went to the finals with U.S. and Sweden. The Czechs and the Canadians are out. So yeah, we got to play the Russians. Yeah. So I mean, I can dig into that if you want me to. I can tell you how that all worked out.
And maybe even before that, right? Because you talked about being in Moscow and feeling the political propaganda. Now, I mean, I'm thinking 1980. Yeah. I'm a kid back then. As Americans, feeling great about ourselves.
Yeah.
There was a lot going on, losing our auto industry.
Social unrest.
Kennedy
had been shot. Martin Luther King. I mean, there was all this turmoil going on in the country with the hippies and women's rights. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on through the 70s. Crazy.
Did you feel that pressure?
It wasn't like, you had to know what was going on because, look, we're all college guys, right? So we're all going to school with these people. So we're experiencing, that aspect of the culture change, campus protests and racial stuff going on, civil rights and all that going on. And the South, crazy and schools, everything. So there was so much going on, right? It was a turmoil. And even when Gavin O'Connor said to me, and again, I worked with Gavin and he kept asking me questions. We hung out when they were very early stages of the movie. And he said to me, like I said, he played football at UPenn. He says, Jack, I got to know how you guys came together as a team. And he goes, I don't like this script. I'm going to rewrite the whole thing. And I said, Gavin, look, I already cut the deal for our team with Disney and we're done. He goes, Jack, I know how teams come together. This script's terrible. He goes, I have to know how you guys came together. And usually that happens off the ice. What happened off the ice? And I said, email me a question and I'll reply. I'll tell you. But he'd email me one question and I'd reply like 6 pages of Word doc, giving him context and background. In my answer, he found Skating in the Dark. I mentioned skating. He goes, what's that all about? And so 6 or 7 things ended up in the movie. But one thing he asked me at the end was, I have to understand how when people say this was much more than a hockey game, what does that mean to you? And I basically said to him, I go, you really want to know? It goes back to World War II. And the World War II generation and their children were the Vietnam generation. And the World War II, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, everybody dropped everything and enlisted and took off. And, my mother-in-law was a Curtiss Wright cadet. I mean, they took her and they trained her as an engineer. She was building rockets and jets, okay, in 1940. 42, okay? And that's what's going on. The whole country said, we have to defend our country, and boom. Now, their children are the Vietnam generation, right? Protesting, and there's this disconnect between these heroic World War II guys and then their children who are basically looking for more, right? They want equality and they want, a different country and they want to change the country. And there was this real disconnect over that time frame. And then you look at everything else that was going on that we mentioned, with the oil embargoes and the hostages and da-da-da. And it was like, eventually, I told Gavin, I said, that's how he started the movie. He started the movie with Hiroshima. And he went through all of that. And that sort of got you to when we were during trials. And that's how we started the movie. I mean, that's him and I talking about it. The crazy thing about it was more than a hockey game, right? And so our team was the catalyst that brought those generations back together. It really was. And believe me, I've had 45 years of stories, right? I've heard it from these Vietnam vets. It's like, Jack, I didn't talk to my dad, for 20 years. Just disconnected because we were on different sort of social pathways. Their way was just, put your head down and do what you're told. Our way was like, no, I want to discuss it, right? And all of a sudden, the one thing that we could agree on was what you guys did, and it brought my family back together. And I've heard that story 5,000 times in 45 years. To be part of that catalyst to bring the country back together and to see how the country came back together and how strong we can be when we are together and not split. It was lightning in a bottle. It really was, for a lot of reasons.
So let's talk about the game. What do you remember about the game?
The Russian game. I remember when Arizioni scored, and there were exactly 10 minutes left in the game. We were up 4-3, and I remember looking up and seeing exactly, 1-0:0-0. And I looked up at 10 minutes, and I looked down the other end, and it was the Russians, and I was like, that's a long time against these guys, 10 minutes, man. We were prepared mentally a lot better than when we played them in Madison Square Garden. It was great for us to play them in Madison Square Garden because we know what they could do if we got a little wayward. And I was talking to Mark Johnson throughout the week, and he's like, Jack, I go, Mark, we could beat these guys. We get it, and he's like, I know we can. He goes, and Mark knew the Russians better than anybody because his dad, Bob Johnson, had coached the 76 Olympic team in Innsbruck. And Bob was a big fan of the Russian style of play and all this, And Herbie, too. I mean, Herbie loved the way they played, but he loved the way they trained. Back in those days, North Americans, they did bench presses and curls, and they worked their arms and their shoulders. They never did squats. So they looked like, I don't know, upside down pyramids, The Russians, they trained their lower bodies. All the Europeans did. That's why they were so strong on their feet and their skates. We would say they had bodies like pears. Herbie trained us so that we could become pears. So we were so fit, incredibly fit, talented, obviously. We knew we had to keep it close with the Russians. You get down 2 or 3 against those guys, and they could just blow your doors off. So we had to keep it close. And even Mark and I were talking about during the week, we were like, if we go in the third period down a goal or tied, he goes, we got a shot. And that's what happened, I mean, Davey Christian scored to tie at 2-2 at the end of the first period. I remember, even though it was right when the buzzer went off, so the Russians, the whole team went off the ice, and then they had to come back on because you can't end the game like that. I mean, end a period. It has to end with a face-off. The ref drops the puck, boom, period's over. So the Russians only sent 5 guys and a goalie out, right? And I was on the bench, and I noticed that they sent Mishkin out with 5 players. So I said to Craig Patrick, they just sent Mishkin out. And he's like, yeah, well, maybe Tretiak already took his skates off. I go, I don't think so. You don't do that. Tretiak's the goalie. He goes back out, even if it's just for half a second. I go, I think they're pulling Tretiak. And he's like, they can't do it. I'm like, well, I don't know. We'll see. And then Michigan came out. I mean, I think their coach, Tikhonov, really had an idea that there was something going on that he didn't like. And you pull in the greatest goalie in the world, one of the greatest goalies in the history of the world. I think that was his way to let his team know, we better wake up here or something bad's going to happen, And of course, in the second period, they came out and they just attacked us. I think they outshot us, I don't know, maybe 14-16-3 or something like that. Jimmy Craig had a great period, and we sustained it. We just gave up 1 goal. So when we went into the third period, we were only down a goal. And I remember talking to Mark. I said, hey, we got these guys right where we want them. He's like, we do. So we were excited about it, that we had that chance, that we put ourselves, we had to play a 20-minute hockey game and try to win 20 minutes. And it was just awesome. But I mean, more importantly than that, we beat the Russians and this and that. And, Herbie, we hadn't talked to the press in 2 weeks. Herbie wouldn't let anybody talk to the press. He wouldn't let the press near anybody. It was interesting. He had to let Craig and Arizioni talk to people that night. And then the next day on Saturday, I mean, he just put us through the hardest practice of the year. It was the hardest practice of the year.
I was going to ask, because for the casual fan, they think that was the gold medal game, and it wasn't.
Well, everybody says that, but I mean, when the fact that so many people have said, hey, trivia question, everybody thinks you won the gold medal when you beat the Russians, but it was really Finland. I'm like, yeah, but everybody says that to me, so maybe it's not such, a secret anymore.
I don't know.
I don't know, maybe.
I still think most people think.
Maybe. Yeah, possibly.
Every hockey fan knows
they
that.
They know, yeah.
But the casual non-hockey fan, they don't know.
No.
That has to be so emotional. Like, wow, we beat them. Like, how do you get back and beat the Finns.
There's so much stuff going around that game, right? So because of the way, again, the schedule was set up 2 years in advance. So, it was like the first place team in Pool A plays the second place team in Pool B. Well, that meant that we play the Russians at 4 p.m. And so now all of a sudden ABC's like, holy cow, we got to have this game on national TV. So they offered millions of dollars to the Russian Federation. But again, Carter had already said we're not sending teams to Moscow for the summer games, which is coming up in July in Moscow. We thought for a while that the Russians were not going to come to the 80 Winter Olympics. I mean, it was nip and tuck there for a while. But again, they're like, well, we're going to send the jewel of our empire, our Russian hockey team over there. We're going to show them how great it is to be Russian. And then we ended up beating them, So that was pretty awesome. But they tried to get, the ABC did everything they could to get that game on primetime. And, we all know that the game was on, they didn't show the game live at 4 o'clock because they thought we were going to probably lose, 15-0 again. And when we ended up beating them, it was insane. So it was one of the most watched sporting events in the history of sporting events. It might still be for all I know. But it was so funny that we played the game. It wasn't on TV. And then everybody's like, they're announcing on TV and radio, like, we can't tell you the score, but you're probably going to want to tune in at 7, And so our parents are all up there, and the Holiday Inn was up the hill from where the rink was, and the Holiday Inn had set up this giant screen. I mean, it's 1980 technology, but it was this giant, projection screen, and our parents are all up there, and, some people had family up there, and they were like 3,000 people in this big, giant, expanded conference room. And so we went up there after our game, 6:30, the game starts at 7. We sat around with our parents with 3,000 fans and had dinner and watched the game. And it was phenomenal. And then, we all go back to, Bobby Suter and I actually stuck around for a little while. We out and had a few pops. And so we just wanted to go experience what was going on downtown Lake Placid. Everybody else went back to the village. Bobby and I stuck around for about an hour. Then we went back. But the next morning, I think it was 11 o'clock, we had practice. And I'll tell you what, Herbie came in with a snarl, man. He was not in a good mood. And, we're a little happy, but he was not. And he made sure that we understood the importance of the next game and the importance to, stay play your game and stay focused. And he beat our brains in. It was probably the hardest practice we had was the day before the Finland game. And everybody's going like, what is he doing? He's going to kill us. But we were in such incredible physical shape that we could take it. And we got the message, And then, of course, we start the Finland game on Sunday morning. Down 1-0 once again.
Of course.
And then we go into the third period down 2-1. And we came in after the second period losing to the Finns. And we're like, and we weren't going like, oh no, what's going to happen? I didn't sit down. I was pacing around that locker room and I was like, there's no way, no, just, saying, not those words, like a little bit more aggressive. Guys were standing up and Herbie kind of came in to say something. And we were like, get out of here. It was so amazing that he had done such a great job is that in the last period of our life together as a hockey team, we didn't need him in the locker room. His job was done. He had put us together. He had assembled us. And at that point, we would pace around that locker room. It was like, when that buzzer goes off, we're going to go out there. And I'll tell you what, it was the greatest 20 minutes of hockey we played in 9 months. And we went out and beat the Finns 3-0 in the third period. And I'll tell you, they were looking at us like, who are these guys? We were like the Russians against the Finns in that third period. We just beat those guys like dogs and winning the gold medal. And, it wasn't as much fun as beating the Russians. It was, I don't want to say it was like a disappointment, but the emotion against the Russians was so intense. The way we just took Finland apart in that third period, it was almost like, wasn't such a big deal after all, but it was pretty exciting stuff. Yeah, and look, it's 45 years ago, I was still talking about it, and I've been talking about it for 45 years. So it's pretty great stuff.
We're going to talk about the NHL. You go to the NHL, but before that, what's it like? You're a gold medalist. All of a sudden, you're famous. You're still a young kid. What was life like?
So it's pretty interesting, right? Again, we beat Finland, right? We're in Lake Placid. It's over. I got a gold medal around my neck. There's snow on the ground. Had seen my parents, had got my gold medal. That'll happen before 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, right? So, we went back to the village, and when I get back there, they're like, hey, man, you got to pack your stuff up. We're going to the White House tomorrow. What? White House? I mean, it's 11 o'clock at night. What time? You got to be on the bus at 7 or something. Be ready to go, and everything's got to be packed because we're not coming back. We're going to the White House, then you're going home. And it was the first time in history a sports team had ever been invited to the White House. The ride-in was insane. People were pulling off the road, getting out of their cars, and it's February 25th, Monday. And people are lining the highways, waving flags. And Everybody was really happy to be an American and so proud of us. And we were proud to be an American. We were just so proud of, having that jersey on and winning and whatever, man. It was just awesome feeling. And the whole country felt it. It was just special, really special. And then we go and have lunch, and I remember standing there, some guy goes, "Hey, how you doing?" I was like, "Oh, hey, hi, I'm Jack O'Callahan." He goes, "Oh, yeah, you want to hockey players?" Yeah, I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Hi, I'm Ben Civiletti. I'm the Attorney General." I was like, "Oh, wow. Nice to meet you in this setting," but it's like stuff like that, right? We have lunch with the president and take pictures, and it was really, really great. And the entire Olympic team was there, which was really cool because we are one country, and one team. And it was just terrific. But the hard part was all of a sudden, then we had to leave, right? So we had made a deal like in November. So Mark Johnson and Leslie, his girlfriend at the time, she's in Madison, Wisconsin, they were getting married July 12th, 1980. And so made a deal like back in October or November that he proposed to her and they set a date. We're like, listen, win, lose, or draw, everybody go to Mark and Leslie's wedding, So we made a plan. When it's over, we're going to be scattered. We all went to Mark and Leslie's wedding, which again, the 300-person people turned into a 2,500-person wedding with all the newscasters and crazy. The wedding just got out of control. I mean, the receiving line, I don't think they ever get out of it, actually. So, I went home and peeling off to play hockey and for different teams.
Well, you were telling me at dinner last night, basically didn't even know you were drafted.
Didn't even know I was drafted.
They drafted and then didn't call you for
year. And that's not how it was, especially when you're an American, right? But all of a sudden, NHL GMs are all Canadians, and they're like, oh, these American guys, they play 30 games a year in college. They can't hold up to an 80-game NHL schedule or set, whatever it was back then. I think it was 80 games, yeah. Anyhow, but there were some guys in the league that were pretty tough guys, Paul Holmgren, Chris Nyland, they were leading the league in penalty minutes. And Americans had to fight their way into that NHL. It was happening throughout, the latter part of the 70s, but when we won that gold medal with talented players and also talented European players, Canadian general managers were like, we got to start paying attention because it was great hockey, not just to the American kids, but also to the Europeans. Now, they couldn't get the Russians or the Czechs out from behind the Iron Curtain, but the Swedes and the Finns, they could. They started wheeling some guys over from there over the course of the decade of the 80s. Americans started, playing. And I think one of our greatest accomplishments as a team was really breaking that glass ceiling and paving the way for guys like, Jeremy Roenick and Chris Chelios and Keith Tkachuk and Tony Amonte and Mike Modano and Bobby Carpenter, blah, 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 blah. All these great American hockey players that had the opportunities as professionals that we never had, But the fact that we helped establish that pathway for them was one of the things we're very proud of.
You played for the Blackhawks for the majority and then also for the Devils?
New Jersey Devils, yeah. It was great. I ended up spending 2 years in the minors, just how they did it in Chicago. I was 22, 23, 24 in the minors. By the time I made it to Chicago, the guys out there were great to me. Tons of friends, tons of great relationships out there. I lived out there for 35 years. I went out there when I was 22 and I didn't leave until I was, 6 years ago when I moved to Florida. Yeah, it was terrific. Won a Calder Cup in the minors, had 3 times, twice with the Blackhawks, once with the Devils, got to the semifinals, the Stanley Cup. Didn't win one, but really close. Would have loved to have won one. And then, 89 came and I could have kept playing, but I had bought a membership at the Chicago Merc and I was really ready to move on in my life. I was 32 and I was kind of getting sideways with my wife at the time. So I went back to Chicago. I kind of wrapped it up. Didn't really want to stay in the game. I wanted to move on. I wanted to, run my own deal and started trading and could have stayed in the game probably in the management level, either as a coach or get in the GM pathway, things like that. Didn't want to be a scout. I think I could have had a pretty good career had I wanted to continue moving all over the place and chasing the game. But I really just wanted to raise my kids and get into the financial business, which is, I bought the membership in 1984. So you think about that. I've been in this financial business for 41 years.
I wanted to ask, you had 2 careers, basically.
Yeah. This one I'm in now, I've had it longer.
That's true. That's true. And you've been successful at both. What from hockey, any lessons that you've been able to, you're like, what, that works in the investment industry, that attitude, that rule, whatever it is. I'm sure in the pits, being a tough hockey player helps.
Well, when I first started down, there was a runner in the summer of 84, I think it was. The guy I met, he said to me, he's like, listen, man, this is a great environment and this and that. He goes, but it's capitalism at its finest, right? And he said, the most important thing down here is integrity and your word. He says, if you violate either of those, he says, people will know that right away and you'll be drummed out of this business. No one will trade with you. No one will trust you. That hit home to me because that was always important to me. As a kid growing up, things like loyalty, integrity, honesty, accountability. And then, I recognized that when I was in the pit trading, sometimes you make a trade and it's a bad trade. You get your butt kicked, you lose a lot of money. Depending on the kind of guy you are, maybe you want to rip up that trading card, or something like that. I mean, that would never cross my mind. Take your lumps, right? You win, you lose, you take your lumps and you move on. That was part of my psychology anyway. And it was reinforced by this guy. I never forgot it when he said that to me because it crystallized what I already believed. As I've been in this business, as a pit trader, as an off-the-floor trader, running an institutional commodities business, I was president of a broker-dealer, and I've got all these licenses and certifications and all these experiences with banking and always in the institutional space. Once I get on the client side, I will never negotiate my integrity, and I think that's something that has really served me well in this industry. I'll never lie to a client. I'm always going to be honest and straightforward. My integrity is inviolable. So that's that. And I think that's something that I learned as an athlete, as a kid growing up. There's accountability, there's integrity, there's honesty. You're going to take your lumps along the way, but you dust yourself off, you get back up and you just get back on it. And sports is a great metaphor for that, right? Because, I remember having a conversation with an orthopedic surgeon in Chicago, the guy that did the Blackhawks orthopedics, Dr. Kolb, and he was asking me about how I manage mistakes. And when you make a mistake on the ice, what do? I go, doc, you can't dwell on it. You just make a mistake. And what are you going to do? You just dust yourself off. You were wrong. You did something wrong. And you know what? It's like get back on the bench, get yourself together and go out and do better. He goes, yeah, I just don't have that mindset. I go, well, you're an orthopedic surgeon. You make a mistake, people die. I make a mistake, we're down 1-0.
Next shift, right?
Yeah, next shift, Yeah.
So what you mentioned you're in Florida, you've got a couple kids, they're adults.
Yeah.
What's
so,
life like now?
Well, life's great. Life's good. I got remarried, I met a woman about 30 years ago and we've been together for 30 years. And, she's a second mom to my kids and, they're in their late 30s. I got my 5th grandchild coming. I live down in Northeast Florida. I moved out of Chicago. Thank you. Plus my first guy, Jackson, he was born on St. Patty's Day, which is kind of cool. If my dad was alive, he'd have been pretty happy about that. He's an old Irish guy.
That's great. Appreciate this. And I got to tell you, the Miracle, probably one of my favorite movies. And I've seen pictures of you as a kid.
Yeah.
They did a pretty good job getting your actor.
Yeah.
He's a lot better looking than you.
It's funny. I would get letters from second graders. You're my favorite hockey player. I got one for this girl. She was from Loma Linda, California. She was a second grader. And she wrote me a letter. And it was like the block, we have the line and then the two lines and the dotted line in the middle. So she was working on her block printing. And what she basically said was, I get to go out on a boat with my dad sometimes. And one time I saw a dolphin swim up to the boat. And I thought that was the coolest thing I ever seen until I got to know you. And you're even cooler than a dolphin swimming up to the boat. She was a second grader. So anyhow, I'm like, oh my God, this is the greatest letter of all time. So I wrote her a letter back. I was like, oh, you're such a great printer and you're so neat. I complimented her. Within 3 weeks, I had 20 letters from all of her classmates, right? And so then every year for the next 5 years, I'd get 20 letters. And I finally called the teacher and I was like, listen, dude, this is getting a little old. And he goes, Jack, you're the first guy that ever replied to these letters. And he says, and now you're our mascot. He says, we got your picture all over second grade and the kids can't wait to write you a letter. And then we make them watch the movie. And it's fun things like that have happened to me and great experiences all in. And it's one of the luckiest guys in the world because I'm still talking about it. And like you and everybody that I run into, no one's ever had a bad word to say about it. And everybody typically has a real personal story associated with it, which I just love listening to.
Well, hey, thanks for sharing that with us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
If you are interested in more information on FEG, check out our website at www.feg.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our communications so you don't miss the next episode. Please keep in mind that this information is intended to be general education that needs to be framed within the unique risk and return objectives of each client. Therefore, nobody should consider these to be FEG recommendations. This podcast was prepared by FEG. Neither the information nor any opinion expressed in this podcast constitutes an offer or an invitation to make an offer to buy or sell any securities. The views and opinions expressed by guest speakers are solely their own and do not necessarily represent the views or opinions of their firm or of FEG.